Okay, so this is wild. This is the last gig of the last day of this incredible event, and so I really want to thank you all for being here. I totally redid my presentation because it's really been informed by the energy that we've had over the last few days, and also, hopefully we're going to have some fun with it because of the time slot we have, and it's really hard to do like a following act after all these great presentations. So I just really want you to feel into like a break. We're going to do, if I'm successful, then you will have left this as this presentation today, really feeling a break from everything that we just did. And then this is something radically new. So what I'm trying to offer you all is a radical proposition today. And so just to frame that, to try not to draw on what has been happening, but to really not think of this as the last thing, the last gig of the last day, but somehow the first gig of the next time. Okay? So we're going to spend just a second here. The title of the course is the Magellan courses. The Magellan courses is a 17-month experiment in transformative education that I've done online for the last 17 months. And this is a little overview of it. We don't have a lot of time to get into everything we've learned. What I hope to do is give you a sense of the design of a thing like this, a beast like this, which is one of these structuralist structures, and give you a sense of what it feels like to be in a course like this. So the Magellan courses was conceived as an experiment in self-organizing, co-creative, transformative education. This wonderful logo that I really love was co-created by the people online in this flurry of activity, which was very, very interesting. That itself could be a presentation. I could show you all the different ways people envisioned what that would look like. So we start off with something that was co-created. So here's the first question. You give it a little bit of thought. This is not part of your little sheet, so we're going to try to answer this by the time we get to the last slide. The illiterate of the future will be those who cannot. All right? Some of you probably think the answer is meta-theorize, but I would warn you that that's probably in the wrong direction. Okay. So I have this funny kind of intuition. I have radical intuition, which is mostly a burden in my regular life. But I'm a meta-theoretician. Some of you read my work from a long time ago. It's hardly understandable. I hardly understand it myself. So, but my relationship to meta-theory is to generate insight. And some of you took my workshop on Thursday, and we had that relationship to meta-theory. So we all know this truism here. Problems cannot be solved by the same mind that created them. And I want to ask you, did we really enter a whole new mind to solve our problems in this conference? Or did we just complexify the mind we came in with? Right? So what I'm after is I like to try to exhaust the activity of meta-theory to gain a kind of insight that crystallizes into easy solutions. Frankly, I think the increasing complexity of meta-theoretical problems has to do with the fact that we have messy questions. Okay? Roy Bhaskar says science does not grow the way we think it does. So people throw out bold conjectures. Einstein throws out a bold conjecture about how the world works. It wasn't developed off the back of Newton. There's a leap happening. And when that bold conjecture comes out, all of a sudden it's an elegant explanation of everything that was complex prior to that. So I think we need to do meta-theory, but I think we're doing meta-theory because we need to be playful with how our mind works, what we're doing with our mind, and we need to be patient because Arne Nass said that Edgar said this last night, life is complex. Nature is complex. But when you walk into nature, you don't get a meta-theoretical hangover. It's elegantly complex. So as a community, we rush to be integral and second tier, and we're all have created 17, I think, paradigm changes already in the last 5 days. But I don't buy into that because we have not found elegant complexity. So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm about. That's what I want to share with you. That's what the 342 people that have been working on the Magellan courses with me over the last 17 months has helped me kind of mine. Okay. So development inside the old paradigm versus evolutionary leap. This presents a radical critique for those of you who are transhumanists or post-human cyborg people. Because the reason why evolution happens in a leap, and Hannah Arendt said this, is because there's a radical difference between having a life in which, for example, you see, my life went through where there was no internet, and then there was internet, Web 1.0, and then Web 2.0. So I have a relationship with the internet that is part of my life. That's a developmental relationship. All right, so I've had to develop capacities to be part of this. But people, when you're born, so that is a structural process that goes through my life. People who are born into structures that already exist don't have a structural process orientation. That is a structure that they are born into. Heidegger talks about it as being thrown into the world. And that creates a dramatically, radically different condition for the development of that person. And so those of you who want to create, humans that live forever, or machines, post-human cyborgs, you are going to cease the evolutionary capacity of the species because it requires both and. It requires being in the processual development of a structure, death, and the complete radical leap of the new generation as that structure is now ontogenetic or involution in them. And that's how creative synthesis, which I consider the life force of the universe, works. So these are just pieces of extractions of what we've been doing in the Magellan course. I talked about elegant complexity, exhausting the paradigm, and by doing meta theory and really having this parallel to design for insight, transformative insight. So how do we design for transformative insight? That's a good question. I'm not going to answer it here because this is all very experimental. But one of the places I want to try to get you to, which is an important way to prime people for transformative insight, is a little thought experiment. And this thought experiment requires you to make a distinction between the perspectival world, so that's everything I see, everything I know, everything I experience, everything, and what I call view. Because everything that is an object to me is not where I'm looking from. So my being state is actually larger than my experience and my existence, right? So I want to prime people by saying, so where are you looking from? It can't be anything that you know, anything that you see, anything that you experience. You're actually always a little ahead of your own experience. And some people doing circle work and meditative work experience this as being able to lean into the future, right? Thomas Hubel talks about this. So the future is actually where you're at. That is not yet an object in any type of awareness. So we prime people by saying, wow, so what we want to do is start leaning at the edge where who you are and where you're at. That's your view. The view is about degrees of freedom, has a lot of freedom and capacity in there. Prior to the actual phenomenal manifestation of that. I don't really care if that's real, true. I'm not trying to make meta theory out of it. It's a heuristic tool for insight training. Okay, so how do we design for transformative insight? This presentation says there's 4 things you need: metaphor, map, method, and mystery. Okay, metaphor. We used the metaphor of Magellan's voyage to organize what we thought about about what we're doing in the Magellan's course. And you think about it, like we are so in love with ourselves, but there's no comparison. I mean, Magellan had to move into unknown territory with instruments that did not work there, not knowing what was going to happen. They had to make up their measurements and their points of references as they went along. It's no comparison. Even when we went to the moon, there was reference points, there was measurements, there was blueprints, had snapshots of what should happen when. So this is a metaphor for the kind of orientation we want to have to radically new views, okay? We don't know what we're doing. We want to throw out 2,000 years of developmental logics. We want to work with primary narcissism is helpful in these exercises. So we say, Nagarjuna, that's 2,000 years ago. Jesus Christ, that's 2,000 years ago. Let the dead be buried, right? So this is the kind of attitude we're looking for. Heidegger, he's dead. He's been dead for hundreds of years. So that's so old. We really are trying to move into territory with kind of inherent sense of freedom, spontaneity, play, creative imaginations. So these are the parts of the metaphors that we use to facilitate some insight discovery. So maps, now, I'm going to go through a lot of maps, but we do not have time to really go through them all. And there's resources in my work elsewhere. And if you go on MagellanCourses.org, you can see 17 months of blog and classroom work there. But we're going to go through it fast, and it's going to give you an example of how we work with theory and meta-theory in the course. We read difficult books, and we read it to provoke insight. So if you feel intellectually dissatisfied with the pace, that's a good place, all right? So this is another way that you have to really kind of figure out, get a feel for the difference of what we're doing here. So we came up with, I'm talking to an integral-centric crowd. So Wilbur came up with his Ackwell perspectival theory. Joel Morrison early on understood that the Ackwell map was flat, that had to do only with an epistemological framework. He uses the third axis as transcendent and immanent. Roy would call them transitive and intransitive. So early on, people started thinking there was something funny about this. In my process theory, I showed that not only was the Ackwell framework epistemological, but there was a process, a science-based process that actually generated the quadrants and also confirmed or suggested that the Ackwell framework needed another axis to work with these ontological or ontogenetic structures. So we're going fast, but this is the early roots in theory. Gebser's integral structure of consciousness. It's very frustrating that the integral community has not yet really captured the insight of this man. So what Gebser was saying was that, early man comes out of the mythic structure of consciousness, starts to work with different types of reasoning. So instead of cyclical correspondence of reasons for why things are with cyclical movements of the gods, we start seeing oceanic thinking. And the construction of the thought of reasoning and oceanic thinking goes up, starts to go somewhere, and then circles back. And that was the early indication of a new way of thinking, of reasoning. Then he said that in pyramidal, the key characteristic of the mental structure of consciousness is pyramidal thinking. And he traces it back to Plato. Now you have to understand that Plato looked at the mythology, we would call them concepts, or mythologemes now, but the structure of reasoning and discourse. And he said, well, what we need to do, and the Socratic method prepared the way for this, what we need to do is find ideals in there and tease them out and separate them into things like unity and plurality. And he called it diaresis. So the real reason why we're all into this, like we got a synthetic integration of everything, is because way back when Plato intentionally created a form of reasoning where you take the situation and you make a separation. And from then on, the reasoning in that required a synthetic third, right? So you have these big waves of ways people work with the synthesis over time. Roy's written an extraordinary book on all the kinds of dialectic. But what we need to know is that this was a creation of the human mind. The dualistic categories that underpin all our discourse are not deep properties of the universe, because there was a time before those categories were part of our reasoning, and I would argue, as Gebser did, that there's a time after those categories will no longer underlay our types of reasoning. So that's what we want to get at. We want to get at a post-dialectical version of reasoning that do not depend on dualistic categories. This would crystallize insight, because you no longer have absolute and relative truth. You no longer have the world of duality, non-duality. It becomes a non-question. To give you an example of exactly when you see this insight, this is how it feels. I like to play a game with young people. They come over and they get on a scale, find out how much they weigh. And then I say, how much does that scale weigh? And it's great because the delight in their mind is experiencing something funny about language, right? And so we're in a position today when we talk about the world of duality and non-duality and wholeness and part and agency and communion. We're in a position we don't understand that joke yet. It's the exact same kind of joke. How much does the scale weigh, right? So this is a real opportunity for a lot of fun. It's fun for me. Paradoxically, when Gebser describes the deficient stage of mental structured consciousness, he is describing conventional mainstream integral theory to a T, right? Because he says it's based on dualistic categories. It happens in space and time. It doesn't contextualize space and time. There's an overemphasis on progress and development and not a clear understanding of evolution. So the fact that integral theory has captured Gebser as one of their confirmation biases is extraordinarily paradoxical. So Wilbur, at one point in one of his books, says, Aqual is the map of the prison. And I think that's the most brilliant statement he's ever made. So we're still in the maps, early roots and theories. I won an award a few years ago for, proposing that that we could watch some of this movement from, this is Michael Basish's developmental stages of dialectical thinking. And so we have dialectical and late-stage dialectical that he's identified. And then I hypothesize that there's a leap. And then there's what I call ontological thinking. Ontological is inherently not dialectical, it's generative. And I use the term ontological because it means the logics of being, right? So it no longer sees epistemology and ontology in dualistic terms. So this is my paper for the last theory. Okay, so these are maps we use in the Magellan course, just to keep going. We also use a map of, well, what's happening over time in philosophy, you know? So we have oceanic thinking. There are some great books. I can't remember his name. Steve Odin on Hanyan Buddhism, which really shows you it's a great, great historical understanding of the mind changing from oceanic to pyramidal thinking. Then we got Plato and Plotinus, who really codified the methodology of diaresis. We have Kant here, who has had really been pivotal in making us all Kantians. You know, we can't read Kant, but just by the force of evolution, we're all Kantians. That's the way we think now. We have Hegel moving and Heidegger moving more toward the paradoxical structure. Wilber's hard. You have Wilber 1, 2, and 3, but I put him over here and more in the Habermasian tradition because that's also where Zach Stein tends to be, and that seems like a logical lineage here. That's the perspectival world. It tends to veer off into hermeneutics and epistemology. We have people like now the specular realists and the object-oriented, naive realists that are still dialectical, but they're moving more toward the empirical and the ontological. Roy's critical realism started here, and he started adding process metaphysics and some moves toward getting away from the dialectical. So that's his movement here. And what we have identified, this map is kind of like Magellan. He had to know at least he had to go west, right? So this is like the map says, well, we don't want to go here, we don't want to go here. We have some sense of the move toward the paradoxical, which Gebser thought was transitional. There's a lot of process philosophy in Buddhist dialectics, so that has something to do with it. And then it's very clear that this, to me anyways, other people, I'm opening it up for conjecture. There may be other kinds of traditions or lineages that are developing in this direction. But I tend to think that the way forward is process metaphysics. Hartshorne deals with this directly, and that would take you on to ontologic. So this is a hypothetical map, but it's part of what helps us move. Okay, so one of the things that's happened about dialectical mind, why it's been so hard to get outside of it, is that the East-West synthesis that we're very proud of has actually confirmed the dialectical mind. And so when Westerners knew that they were dualistic, someone like Wilber and many of us reading early on, and I remember reading Schopenhauer and trying to find someone who was, it's like a bait and switch game, you start with a duality. Schopenhauer starts by deconstructing all these dualities, and in the end you have world and representation, And I was very excited about Wilber, and he deconstructs contextualizes all these dualities, and in the end he says, well, there's relative and there's absolute truth. This is like, you get snookered. It's like just a bait and switch game. You just start upping the ante to more and more transcendent qualities, but you have the same construction of reasoning. So one of the false confirmations that has happened in the East-West dialogue, you heard Suzanne talk about this the other day, is that the world of duality is not just a Western problem. Because if you do Buddhist scholastics, you'll find they end up in the same place. And so it's not a coincidence, because all this research has been done within the Indo-European language family. So if you read my early work, I make a distinction between Buddhism and pre-Buddhist Tibetan Bon scholastics, which is a completely different language family. So we've had some kind of confirmation bias in terms of subject-verb-object, ontic versus changing, growth and conceptual sophistication. There are languages outside the Indo-European language family where the growth and the sophistication of thought does not go toward differentiation, complexification, and synthetic. And the early Taoist, pre-Confucian Taoists in their anti-language period, there's a book, Suarez, it's listed in my paper. It's a great story about exactly where to go and find some of this discourse outside of the Indo-European language family. We've got Buddhism coming from the Indo-European through across China, and then we have someone like Nikita Kitaro during the great pre-World War II intellectual trade, reading Hegel, and coming up independently with some kind of Hegelian dialectics that gets implanted into Zen Buddhism. So, like, there's no escape, you know. So this is what I call the closure of the Western mind, okay? There's no escape. So it's just a map. It's a story to help us figure out that we have to at least go west here. Okay, I showed you that one. Okay, method. Very briefly, these are the people that we read. So it's in the paper. I know you can't see it back there. Sorry. Jason Brown, Christopher Alexander, Joel Morrison, Eugene Gendlin, David Michael Levin, Thomas Arthur, Panikar and Bashkar, Goethe, Charles Hartshorne, and Bruno Latour. The topics, the key fulcrum involved in the discourse: subject-object, transcendence, immanence, epistemological and ontological, implicit versus explicit, being versus doing, self-nature, emancipation versus liberation, self-culture, empiricism versus phenomenology, the absolute versus the relative, and nature versus society. So we're just going there, right? We're just like not trying to do meta theory. We're trying to mine this work for insight. This is, again, we're on method. So how do you meta design for this? How do you meta design to open people to the unknown, right? And this is really tricky. And because the discursive mind, the dialogical mind, the dialectical mind is greedy. You know, they're greedy for objects. This is the not only key. It creates a lot of energy for a lot of success that we've had in the last 2,000 years. So why does this matter? Because the guess here is that we're not going to solve our problems from a dialectic, dualistic mind. So that's the guess. It wouldn't matter. We wouldn't have to change if we could solve our problems. But it seems like the solutions are becoming unactionable because of the meta-theoretical complexity. So meta design, opening to the unknown, we have to avoid making an object for the discursive mind. And this is a thing I borrowed from Shinzen Young, and I've kind of made it into a little mantra, and that is, if you're in a community of practice and you're trying to train for insight, and I frame it by giving you a theoretical overview of where we're going, then I've placed an object in your mind, right? And so the mantra is, when you make an object of inquiry for the discursive mind, then the medicine has become the poison. So you have people having received knowledge of Buddhism or religious practice. You have people having received knowledge of certain insights, but they don't have the insights, right? So it's very, very tricky. When you create an object out of the inquiry for the discursive mind, that mind grasps it. And then the medicine, what you're offering them, becomes poison. This is a strong critique on methodologies like the authentic self and the unique self. It's a very, very strong critique on the kinds of late-stage rational activities that are trying to do authentic inquiry. So that's a methodological problem. It's not a critique of the work. It's a critique of the method. We practice generative dialogue. Early on in the Magellan course, we had those, and we have had here and there those kinds of pathological threads that start to be a bunch of triggers going back and forth, and even when they're not angry, they tend to be too accommodating or enabling. So getting out of the self-object kind of language that creates dualistic discourse is a methodology. And when we think about it, I mean, this could be a whole presentation, but if you say something to me, and then I mirror it back and I said, so you're saying blah, 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 and then I respond to that, well, then I've just done a dialectical injustice because I fixed your thought to the boundary that you just gave it to me. Well, this is what you're saying. You had 12 words, and that's you. But then I bring it into mind, I realize my mind is a process. You know, that my thoughts, my ideas are much larger than the words that are coming out of my mouth. So I've fixed your understanding as an object for me then to reflect on. So these are little things we're teasing out in terms of getting into generative dialogue versus dialectical dialogue. And then this is what I'm currently most fascinated with, and that is this notion of doing ritualized inquiry. And so what ritualized inquiry is the term for the kinds of things that I think works for insight training, and making sure that these three bases are already covered, then we can start to do ritualized inquiry, which we're going to do now. So everybody needs, what's my time? I think I'm really good for time, right? Yeah. Okay. No questions, okay? Not yet. No, but we're doing really good for time, so we're going to have plenty of time for questions. I've had 17 months of this. So everybody needs 3 little pieces of paper. Some of you just show up the little chits of paper that you have. Like one of those sheets can turn into 3. Yeah, just cut that into 3 equal pieces of paper. It's no big deal. They don't have to be little. They just don't, yeah.
I can give someone the paper.
So I just want to point out that Lee came properly prepared to this because she didn't have a pen, and that's really the right orientation usually to this work. So I just want to applaud that. Okay. Are we ready? Now we're going to have plenty of time. So I know I'm like an auctioneer up here. But in this process, then we'll have plenty of time to just ask questions, and we can go back in slides. So don't feel that we're going to lose out here. Okay, so I want you to take the first sheet. And I want you to think of something you know. Just something you know. It could be something big and important. It could be something small and trivial. Whatever pops into your head. Just something you know. It could be a big thing. It could be a little thing. If you have more than one, don't let them compete. Just put both of them or 3 of them down. You just want to put that on a piece of paper. Don't overthink it. Could be a little thing. I know I'm tired today. It's just something you know. I know the world is flat. I know that the world is composed of concrete universals. I channeled that from somewhere. Could be anything. And as you're writing it, and for those of you who are still waiting a little, just look at that and sense into that knowing. It feels what it feels like that you know something. You don't have to get theoretical. I mean, it's just something you know. It's just kind of a state. You just know that. Okay, now I want you to crumple that up.
That's fun.
And I want you to offer it to the circle. We put it right here in the middle of the room. Just throw it right there. Yeah, there you go. Nice job. I forgot to bring the little bag I was going to pass around, but I thought, okay. So number 2, I want you to think of something you fear. Could be a big thing, could be a little thing. If you have more than one, don't let them compete, just put them both down and write it on a piece of paper. And for those of you who are waiting, just look at what you wrote and just kind of feel into the relationship, how we know we fear something. It's a little bit different place you go to find what you fear. Look at it and just feel that relationship between where you go to find your fears. We're not talking about extraordinary experiences, just ordinary ones. And you take that paper and you crumple it up and you offer it up to the circle. Okay, how are you feeling? Okay, number 3, third one and last one for this ritualized inquiry. I want you to write down a question you have. If you have more than one, don't let them compete. Just write down them both or 3 of them. It could be a big question. It could be an ordinary question. Doesn't matter. Those of you who are waiting, just look at what you've written. Just kind of feel into where you go to find your questions. It's a little different. It's not an extraordinary experience. It's an ordinary experience. And not surprisingly, I want you to crumple the paper and chuck it into the circle.
Okay, there's a bit of directionality.
Okay, now we're going to find out what's left. So this is the comment session of this presentation, but it can't be a question of fear or a knowing in the discourse. So we're going to try to find out what's left. Now, we can get stuck here all day. So if those of you are brave, if you're not sure if what you're going to contribute qualifies, it would be great to start. But then we do things like we put our hands up and stop you because we see that there's a knowing, a fear, or a question in there. And then you just stop. So we're going to try to find out what's left.
Curious to explore.
Not knowing.
Butterflies.
Faith.
Who said that? It's very interesting.
Awareness.
Listening.
Space. The willingness to say something. Pregnant.
What's next?
Good, I wanted to get one, so thank you very much. It could be, the language is tricky. You could have experienced that as not a question. But you see? Okay. Yeah. I fell into a knowing. So you all should have went like this.
Intention.
Quality of light in the room.
Yeah, quality is you notice that I'm noticing that quality, the words start to move toward quality. The search space we're in that has a lot of quality type tastes to it, right?
Witnessing. Residing. Doubt. Will.
Curiosity.
Not knowing how to string more than one word together to represent what's actually transpiring in your awareness.
Sensing energy.
So we're all moving in the right direction, right? So we could move in that direction further.
Spaces.
Movement.
Receiving.
Openness.
Oh,
Not knowing how to distinguish knowing from receiving.
Childlike anticipation.
so we'll try to move in that direction further.
Patience and impatience.
Anticipation. Being present.
Knowing. Possibility.
Impulse.
Arising novelty. Sitting.
Joy.
Anger.
Whoa, shoot. So now we want to answer that question. The illiterate of the future will be those who cannot stay in the space.
Imagine.
Cry.
Trust.
Create.
Sense.
Sense of newly arising.
Listen to themselves.
Listen.
Explore.
Maintain integrity with unknownness.
Balance heart, mind, and behavior.
Okay, so we're moved into a little bit of knowing. It feels a little more like knowing. This is not unusual because knowing, fear, it seems to me, my experience of this exercise has been that knowing, fear, and questions arise as a pattern. So if you ask a question, this is a very interesting thing for a community of inquiry, right? You ask a question, then the knowing and the fear like jump on board. You make a knowing, then in your community of practice, the question's going to jump on board, right? They're packaged together in kind of like a dysfunctional family. So this is a pattern. This is a karmic pattern or organismic pattern. So now we have to try a little harder. We slipped a little, coming into this question, we slipped a little into what usually rides on a question is knowing. So it's very subtle, but let's go right back down to not knowing, fearing, or question. We can't even be in relationship to the question as a question. It's like more of a sentence stem. So the illiterate of the future will be those who cannot, and just slip a little farther down. Attune. Kunat, presence, feel. So that's my answer, feel, because I think the words that we're using actually all have a feeling quality to them. So this is my meta-theoretical conclusion, that the illiterate of the future will be those who cannot feel. And we're not talking about a trivial sense of the word, right? We're talking about what you all were presencing here. And the potential and the possibility to do work on complex problems from that orientation is really exciting. It's really exciting. But it is a radical proposition. It's an experiment. Yeah. How am I doing for time?
Good, it's got 35, 40 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so now we can go into talk mode. What I'd like you to do is group up in, 3 or 4s. I want you to talk about how you experienced the ritualized inquiry. What was it like for you? Like, what kind of things were you watching? What was difficult? What was easier? When I asked that question, well, what is left? What was going on when you did that exercise? So we'll get in groups, we'll hash that out, and then we'll ask you to share some of that. So maybe the tables can be groups or. Fine, huh?
Thank you so much. I'm just going to dash and see Tim's.
Yeah, good. Words up, yeah.
Perserian firstness.
Yeah.
Is that... Did John tell you my next book's called Opening to Unknown?
No.
So that's the practice of this apological firstness inquiry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're just going to do questions, so yeah, I did really good on time. But if I got hung up on theory, I wouldn't have been able to go past it,
It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
It's exactly the space.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Enjoy. Yeah. You're, okay. So if we can come back. Come out wherever you are.
No way.
Okay, so we have 15 minutes left, and my thought would be to pass the mic around. So every table, at least one person, if not, it would be ideal if every person could speak. So we have to be mindful of offering a gem in a very kind of compressed form. But it would be really great to have the mic move around and from table to table. So we're looking for some insight. You're going to try to name an insight or something that may felt like an insight in this process. We have to be very short, so if you can't crystallize what's coming up for you, please just, don't use your turn. And this, I think, would be a great contribution to the people who are going to listen to this recording. So this is really, we're offering this as gifts to the people who are going to come after us and listen.
Yeah. We discussed the... Can I go? Okay. Yeah. We discussed the end of the sentence Bonnie offered, and we came up with other things other than feel. We came up with openness, receptivity, and feeling, but like in gross, subtle, and causal.
We talked about the end word also of feel, but not an emotional feel, but more or less feeling the field of where we were and being childlike and jumping off into the abyss of trusting.
We talked about how this activity helps to evoke states of being as a way also to open to sourcing information from a different place. And one comment was just the question of what's the point? And another discussion we're having was about applying this in the context of teaching in the classroom to create a different relational field with the students.
Perhaps growing a sense of the need in the integral community for the complementary the less Apollonian and the more like Dionysian sort of dialogue and embodied and presence rather than just the academic framework that we're presenting all of our individual approaches in coming at.
I think when you label, question, fear, it all of a sudden it sits there, so it disappears. So I think we were having this incredible collective inquiry and knowing that it wasn't going to go necessarily any place, but it would allow the creativity that the three of us had to really emerge without the three. So.
We were there was a theme of curiosity about the practice that it would take to be able to come from that space and work in complex, in ways that were more complex, or ways that were absorbing more complex information and coming up with things to offer.
We were from 2 different countries and language bases, and so we felt sort of a tickled universality, I guess, that came out of this, that goes beyond our ability to communicate in a particular language, but to share an experience.
I love that. Tickled universality. I love that.
I think our group would just add,
I think our group talked about the lack of identification and personality that occurs in that space beyond questioning, beyond knowing, and beyond fearing. And we explored the difference between witnessing and feeling, and whether there's a sense of attachment or non-attachment that occurs at that state.
We really had a sense of questioning, sort of like, okay, where are we now? And what came out of that, I think, was some kind of consensus on the importance of feeling and love, and how that leads to potentially answering questions, a creative space of being able to answer questions that we maybe hadn't even thought of before. I don't know.
Right, and I think this insight answered maybe what's the point, and gave a little sense of possibility about using that space to answer more difficult questions. So in this kind of triangulated itself. So thank you.
And it's a kind of a situation like improvisation. You don't know what comes up. You know the tune, but you have to practice. You have to know your scale, but you don't know what happens with your fingers.
A release of tension and a relaxation of attention into and as what is, rather than attempting to cling to specific preconceived forms.
Yeah, and I think that also is now starting to answer this. I mean, why do we approach complex problems in a state of tension? It's probably not optimize our ability to be creative in a closed system. Yeah.
It's like opening a landscape which is empty, but at the same time being all present. So that's, the first step to allowing something to happen.
Fantastic.
In a shared space.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
We talked mostly about a long comment that I made about feeling that the intuition of this, where we're going, is beautiful and right on. But I felt like our exercise had a deep structural flaw in it that fundamentally opposed our actually getting there.
I mean, your personal tables.
Well, that was my comment, and we talked about that.
Okay. Yeah, this is just the beginning of what would be normally a 3 or 4 day workshop, and we start to really then add back the insights into like systems thinking, let's say. But the types of systems that we start to add back are usually, if you do this process right, not overwhelmingly complex. So one of the systems that we worked on at a workshop last fall was watching how knowing, fear, and questions arise as a system, and understanding that as long as you're inside that system, then you can't really be creatively paradigmatic, perhaps, because even though you're doing a lot of work and your concepts are growing and stuff, it's still the same structure of inquiry. And so that would be how, in this case, that was what was then worked on from that framework. So we do start to add back systems thinking primarily. We talk about, we get one of the other things that is common that happens is we start to be very good at identifying some kind of fundamental dualistic structure in the question, and we call that everyday bardo. And then once you can start to identify these at a subtle level, we do what's called, we start to constellate the field of inquiry with other nodes and see how they work generatively. So you're not stuck between, Democrats or Republicans or whatever. And so, for example, in a group I'm working with, we're looking at the economy as fundamentally flawed to go forward. Everything worked for us for a long time, so don't get me wrong. But fundamentally flawed going forward because it's a binary system. You can't create money without debt. My house can't stay neutral in value. It floats in a rivalrous economy. And the fundamental problem may be just that it's a binary system. So we're doing this work where we're trying to find a generative third. So can money flow from asset to liability to a generative third, or from public to private to a generative third, and then go back into the system? This is very exciting because you don't have to transform the existing anything. You just add a generative third. And so this notion of generative versus synthetic thirds, okay? Synthetic thirds want to add something and then own the whole economy. So using this work to identify what we call everyday bardo, finding the fundamental binary construction of the question and trying to at least constitute it with a generative third, usually more than three things come. We start to just populate it with a lot of ideas and try to do some systems thinking there. So that's one of the ways that the thing gets a little more practical. The other thing, this is so hypothetical, but we'll end with it because it's really fun, that if you think about all computers are binary systems, they're all Turing machines, right? And there's two types of people working on quantum computing. There are those that are using the quantum state merely to reproduce the binary construction of artificial intelligence at a faster rate. But then there are those that are looking at probability space as the constellation of intelligence. This requires a whole new mind. This is really edgy stuff. These people are thinking in whole new mind. So, that's not a field that I can add to, but you start to see the movement of some of these elegant leaps outside of what has been the case for the last 2,000 years. And I think we're all a part of that, and that's really, really exciting. So I just